$250,000. That was the number that changed everything. It sounded impossible, almost laughable, until I saw the look in Beverly's eyes when she said it. She wasn't joking. She wanted $250,000 from every single household in our neighborhood, and she said it like it was as ordinary as asking for dues to cover lawn service. I remember the way the metal folding chair creaked under me that night, the stale air of the Maplewood Community Center pressing against my skin. It was March, a Tuesday evening, and the smell of too many anxious bodies in a cramped, overheated room clung to the air. People had rushed in from work, some still in uniforms, others in scrubs, young parents with strollers trying to shush their crying kids. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a sound you don't notice until you're already stressed. And then Beverly walked in 40 minutes late, not a hint of apology. She came flanked by two men in pressed suits and a woman with a notepad, like she was running a corporate takeover, not an HOA meeting. Her heels clicked sharp against the linoleum floor, and every step seemed to steal the breath from the room. She didn't waste time. She raised her chin, smiled that icy smile she always wore, and announced it. Based on emergency infrastructure assessments, each household is required to pay a mandatory improvement fee of $250,000. Payment is due in 90 days. The silence was so thick I swear you could hear someone's heart beating across the room. A woman near the front gasped, then made a small choking sound. I turned and saw her, an older neighbor, white hair trembling, eyes wide, whispering to herself as if praying. Around me, young military families froze, clutching phones they couldn't afford to lose, their faces pale. I sat there, staring at Beverly, and something inside me snapped. This wasn't about improvements. This wasn't about a parking lot or a clubhouse. This was destruction, bankruptcy wrapped in legal language. I stood, my voice came out louder than I expected. This assessment is excessive and it's not properly documented. We demand transparency. Where's the proof? Every eye turned. For a second I thought maybe I'd gone too far. Beverly's smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. She leaned on the podium like a queen bored with her subjects. Mr. Robinson, all procedures have been followed. Payment deadlines are non-negotiable. She said it with the kind of confidence only someone rehearsed could pull off. But I caught something, a twitch, just for a moment, like she had been waiting for resistance, and already had her reply memorized. A murmur ran through the room. Some neighbors nodded, relief flickering in their faces, like maybe they weren't crazy for thinking this was wrong. I felt their eyes on me, desperate, waiting for someone else to carry the weight. That's when my brother Marcus walked in. A successful attorney, the kind of man who always carried himself with confidence. Usually his presence alone was enough to calm people, but not that night. He looked off. Sweaty, distracted, checking his phone every few minutes. His tie wasn't straight and he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Later, I'd understand why, but in that moment I only felt confusion. When the meeting finally broke apart into frantic whispers and arguments, Marcus pulled me aside. His words were low, almost rehearsed. "Stephen, this is serious. Beverly has documentation, lawyers. Don't challenge the assessment itself. Focus on timelines, maybe negotiate softer terms." It felt wrong, my own brother telling me not to fight the obvious fraud. His voice was steady, but his eyes, they darted, restless. 2 days later, Beverly showed up at our front door. She carried a leather portfolio, that same cold smile plastered on her face. But it was her words that froze my blood. "I understand teaching salaries create budgeting challenges," she said sweetly. "Especially with your current balance of $43,000. I swear my knees almost gave out. She knew our bank account balance, down to the $1,000. That number wasn't public, only Amy, Marcus, and I knew it. Amy met my eyes across the room, her lips pressed tight, the documents Beverly had brought spread across the kitchen table. And that was the first time I saw it, the quiet fire in my wife's eyes. She wasn't just angry, she was calculating. Later that night, she sat at the table under the dim glow of our old hanging light, her notebook open, analyzing Beverly's paperwork line by line. It wasn't casual curiosity. It was precise, methodical. The way she asked questions about federal housing law didn't sound like guesswork. It sounded like someone who had done this before. I watched her trying to understand. My wife had always been quiet, calm, but now every detail she noted, every regulation she cross-checked felt deliberate, professional. That's when I started to wonder, who exactly was Amy? They say the scariest thing isn't what you know, it's what you suspect. And by the time Amy spread Beverly's documents across our kitchen table, suspicion was eating me alive. It was late, the kind of late where even the streetlights outside looked tired. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the low hum of a distant lawnmower someone forgot to put away and the rhythmic creak of our back gate in the wind. I sat there, staring at my wife, as she flipped through Beverly's so-called infrastructure reports with surgical precision. Her pen scratched against paper in neat, controlled lines. She circled numbers, highlighted terms, and muttered things like non-compliant, missing permit, no competitive bid. She wasn't just glancing. She was dissecting it, the way I'd seen generals dissect battle plans in old documentaries. Finally, she looked up at me. "Stephen, what exactly did Marcus say when you asked about legal options?" I hesitated. He told me not to fight the fee itself, just stall, maybe negotiate. Amy's eyes narrowed. For a moment, she didn't look like my wife. She looked like someone who just confirmed a dangerous theory. And that's when it hit me, Beverly knew about our finances, our private conversations. She knew details she shouldn't have, which meant someone close was feeding her information. The thought made my stomach twist. Only 3 people had ever known those numbers: Amy, me, and Marcus. The next day, Beverly escalated. A crisp letter slipped into our mailbox, not handwritten, not casual. Professionally typed, legal phrases bolded in places that made your chest tighten when you read them. It accused us of harassment of HOA leadership and warned of legal consequences if we continued to interfere. I remember the sound of the paper crinkling in my hand as I showed it to Amy. She didn't flinch. She just read it, nodded once, and tucked it into her growing binder of evidence. Saturday came, and with it the storm. Beverly called the cops, claimed we'd threatened her. My heart dropped when the cruiser pulled up outside. The neighbors peeked through blinds, whispering. To them, we were already guilty. Detective Thompson stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with that weary look cops get when they've been called to the same neighborhood one too many times. He asked routine questions, his tone clipped, professional. Beverly hovered nearby, arms folded, smirking like she'd already won. But then Amy did something I'll never forget. She calmly reached into her wallet, pulled out an ID, and handed it to him. Thompson looked down, read it, and his entire posture shifted. Shoulders squared. Voice deepened. He stood straighter, his pen moving slower as he took her statement. I couldn't see the ID from where I stood, but I could see the change in him. Beverly noticed it too. For the first time, her confidence cracked. When Thompson left, assuring us there was no evidence of harassment, Beverly's smile was gone. And by that evening, she somehow knew everything that had been said. She knew Amy had shown ID. She even hinted at it in a voicemail she left me, dripping with mockery. Military background won't protect you forever. That was the final straw. That night, Amy spread more papers on the table, her voice low but firm. "Stephen, she knows our account balance, and only Marcus has heard that exact number." I didn't want to believe it. My brother, the one who'd helped me move into this house, who'd toasted our mortgage papers with cheap champagne, who'd been godfather to our daughter. But the pieces fit too neatly. The betrayal was a quiet, suffocating weight in my chest. Instead of lashing out, I did the only thing I knew how to do: teach. I started inviting neighbors over, first just a few, for coffee in cramped living rooms. We whispered like conspirators, afraid of Beverly's ears everywhere. 5 families turned into 10, 10 into 20. People shared stories they'd been too afraid to admit out loud: threats, fines, mysterious violations. And that's when Dorothy Clark stepped up. 78 years old, silver hair tied in a bun, eyes sharp as nails. She slammed a notebook onto my kitchen table during our second meeting. "Stephen, I taught English for 40 years. I know a bully when I see one, and I've been documenting Beverly's tricks for 2. Her notes were meticulous. Dates, times, names, patterns of harassment. Everything Beverly thought she'd gotten away with was right there in Dorothy's shaky but determined handwriting. For the first time, I saw something stronger than fear in my neighbor's eyes. I saw anger and hope. But every step forward seemed to trigger Beverly to dig in harder. Phone calls at midnight, notes shoved under doors, whispers about radicals destroying property values. Some families wavered, tempted by her secret offers to cut their fees in half if they dropped out. And through it all, Marcus kept showing up, smiling that lawyer's smile, asking questions that felt less like advice and more like intel gathering. By then, I wasn't just suspicious. I was afraid. Afraid that the biggest threat wasn't the woman standing at our doorstep, but the man I'd called my brother all my life. They say betrayal feels like a knife. For me, it was quieter than that. It was the way Marcus leaned across my kitchen table, pen in hand, jotting down who showed up to our neighborhood meeting like he was taking roll call. Not helping, recording. And I couldn't shake the question pounding in my skull. Why does my brother want a list of who's resisting Beverly? The night Dorothy hosted her first gathering, I saw the shift firsthand. Families crammed into her modest living room, the faint scent of lemon cleaner in the air, shoes piled by the door. Folding chairs scraped against the wooden floor as people squeezed in, whispering to each other like kids caught passing notes in class. That's when Beverly made her boldest move yet. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She stormed in uninvited with two suited men trailing behind her like shadows. The room fell silent. Her voice carried with practiced sympathy. "I understand financial stress," she said smoothly, "so I'm prepared to offer tiered payment plans. Military families only $150,000, elderly $200, young families with kids just $100. She made it sound like kindness, like she was doing us favors. But I saw the calculation in her eyes, divide them, make them argue among themselves. For a moment, it almost worked. The young couple with newborn twins exchanged glances, desperate calculations flickering in their eyes. The elderly man in the back leaned forward, knuckles white on his cane, tempted by the promise of extended payment plans. But Dorothy stood. Her voice, though cracked with age, cut through the room with steel. "We're not negotiating extortion. We demand transparency." Her words sparked a ripple of murmurs, then applause. Beverly's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of cold fury. When she left, she made a phone call just outside the window. Her words carried inside, chilling the air. "The psychology approach isn't working. Escalate to direct pressure immediately. They're more organized than anticipated." The next morning, 3 families who had refused her offers received phone calls from government agencies. IRS audits, Child Protective Services, concerns. Even immigration services for one family who'd lived here peacefully for decades. The timing was too perfect to be chance. Beverly had connections, dangerous ones. And still, somehow, she kept knowing everything. She knew who attended meetings. She knew which families were wavering. She knew the precise fears whispered in private after the lights were off and the chairs folded away. That night, Dorothy called me, her voice trembling but steady. "Stephen," she referenced something I said in a private conversation, one I had with only 3 people present. 3 people, and one of them was Marcus. I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the creak of the house, the faint tick of the hallway clock, Amy's steady breathing beside me. Every sound felt amplified, like the whole world was waiting. By dawn, the choice was clear. I couldn't keep pretending Marcus was just misguided. He was feeding her information. He had to be. The next meeting, I tested him. Casual questions. A slip about a new strategy we were considering. 2 days later, Beverly used those same words almost verbatim when she cornered a neighbor about backing down. My chest burned with the realization. My own brother wasn't just failing to help us. He was the leak. But why? The answer came one night when I followed him after he rushed out of dinner, phone pressed tight to his ear. He drove downtown, parked by the casino, and met 2 men in the shadows. Their conversation wasn't about legal briefs. It was about debts. Big ones, numbers so large my throat went dry just hearing them. Marcus was Beverly's ally by choice. He was a man drowning, clawing at anyone he could to stay afloat. And Beverly? She had turned his desperation into a leash. Back home, Amy was waiting. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee gone cold, papers spread across the table again. She listened silently as I told her what I'd seen. She didn't look shocked, she just nodded, that quiet fire still burning in her eyes. Then we know the truth, now we use it. I realized then that Amy wasn't just analyzing Beverly's documents. She was playing a longer game, watching, recording, preparing. And if Marcus had chosen to stand on Beverly's side, even out of desperation, he was about to learn what happens when family stops being a shield and becomes evidence. They say pressure reveals character. Under Beverly's pressure, I saw my neighbor's courage. Under Amy's, I saw something else entirely, something I hadn't realized she'd been carrying for years. The turning point came on a Sunday afternoon. Clouds hung low, gray, and heavy, the kind that made the whole street feel smaller, like the sky itself was pressing down. I was out front, raking leaves into a pile, when Beverly's SUV rolled slowly down the street. She didn't stop, just slowed enough for me to see her in the driver's seat, sunglasses on, smirk playing at the corner of her lips. It was the look of someone who thought she already owned you. That night, a note appeared under our door. No envelope, no signature, just one line in neat block letters: "Your wife's military service won't protect you from what's coming next." I stared at it for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. The hallway light buzzed above me, and I could hear the faint sound of Amy washing dishes in the kitchen. My first instinct was to hide it, to spare her. But when I handed it over, she didn't flinch. She just slid it into her binder of evidence and said quietly, "This will help later." The calm in her voice rattled me more than the threat itself. If Beverly thought fear would break us, she was wrong. That week I doubled down, more meetings, more conversations. Families gathered in dim living rooms, kids playing quietly in corners while their parents whispered about rights and laws. I printed copies of state housing statutes, handed them out like study guides. People clutched them like lifelines. The retired couple from Maple Street admitted they'd been getting violation letters for months, threats of fines if they didn't pay. The single mom from Oak Avenue confessed Beverly had knocked on her door 3 separate times, each visit more aggressive than the last. A young military family revealed they'd been warned that their security clearances could be affected by community disputes. Every story was the same pattern: intimidation, financial pressure, isolation. And then Dorothy spoke up. She slapped her thick notebook down again, her eyes blazing. "This woman's been at it for years, targeting the elderly, the military, single parents, anyone she thinks can't fight back, but she made one mistake this time. She underestimated us." The room erupted in applause. For the first time, people weren't just scared. They were angry, determined. That week we voted unanimously to reject Beverly's assessment and demand transparency. Not 20 families cowering in fear anymore. A united neighborhood, a community. But Beverly didn't back off. She shifted gears. That Friday, 3 families received surprise visits. Not from her, from official-looking inspectors citing safety concerns. Elderly residents got letters warning of expensive repairs. Military families had strangers show up, murmuring about how disputes might hurt their careers. Young parents received anonymous tips about college scholarships being at risk if they associated with radical neighbors. It was psychological warfare, professional, targeted, cruel. And still, somehow, she knew details of our private meetings. Specific concerns, exact words. The leak wasn't just possible anymore, it was undeniable. "Marcus." I watched him closer. The way he lingered after meetings, casually asking who seemed nervous, who was wavering. His pen moving when he thought no one noticed. One night after everyone left, I confronted him. "Why are you taking notes, Marcus? Why do you care who hesitated?" He didn't miss a beat, just smiled that lawyer smile. "Stephen, I'm protecting you. If you push too hard, these families will crumble. Someone has to keep track of who might break." It sounded reasonable, almost convincing, but I'd already seen him in the shadows of the casino, and Amy didn't buy a word of it. Later, she pulled me aside. Her voice was calm, measured. "He's not protecting you, he's protecting himself. Watch what he asks, not the advice, the names." And she was right. His questions were never about strategy, never about law, always about people. Who was scared? who was firm, who might fold. It was intelligence gathering, plain and simple. But Amy, she was gathering too, not fear, evidence. I noticed the way she organized her notes, the precision of her questions, the late-night phone calls she took in the other room, voice low, tone professional. This wasn't just a wife standing by her husband. This was someone playing chess while the rest of us were learning checkers. One night long after Marcus had left and the house was quiet, I found her at the table again. Papers spread out, a single lamp casting sharp shadows across her face. She didn't look up when she spoke. "Stephen, you need to prepare yourself. This isn't just Beverly, it's bigger, organized, and Marcus, he's deeper in than you think." I sat across from her, heart pounding. "How do you know?" She finally met my eyes, and for the first time I realized my wife wasn't just quietly strong. She was hiding something big. Sometimes the truth doesn't crash into your life. It creeps in, quiet and steady, until you realize you've been living with it all along. The truth about Marcus came to me on a screen. Amy had been at her laptop for 3 nights straight, eyes locked, fingers moving with the speed of someone who knew exactly where to look. She barely spoke except for clipped requests. "Stephen, what date did Marcus say that? Do you remember the exact words?" On the 4th night, she pushed her chair back. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of something that would change everything. "Sit down," she said softly. "You need to see this." I sat beside her, the glow of the laptop washing over us in the dark kitchen. On the screen were text messages, dozens of them, forwarded straight from Marcus's phone to a burner number registered to Morris Development Company, Beverly's people. Each one was like a knife. Family discussed payment concerns again. Timeline pressure is working. Brother stressed over organizing efforts. Wife more knowledgeable than expected. Report community meetings growing. Attendance increasing. Recommend accelerating intimidation. My breath caught. These weren't vague notes. They were our conversations, our fears, our strategies. Every single detail I'd trusted my brother with handed over to Beverly. Amy's voice was steady, too steady. "He's been reporting everything for months." I gripped the table so hard my knuckles turned white. The man I'd looked up to, trusted with my daughter's godfather role, had been feeding Beverly intel like a paid informant. But why? That answer came the following week. I followed Marcus again, this time not even hiding it. He drove to the same casino, met the same 2 men in the shadows. Only this time I stood close enough to hear. The words cut through the night like shards of glass. "If you don't pay by Friday, we'll collect another way." Marcus's voice cracked as he begged for more time. They mentioned numbers, debts in the hundreds of thousands. Gambling, embezzlement, things I didn't want to believe were true until I saw the desperation in his face. Beverly hadn't just found a weak spot. She had used it, twisted it, locked him in chains he couldn't escape. When I confronted him that night, the mask fell. My confident attorney brother broke down in our kitchen like a child. His voice shook, his hands trembled. "Stephen, I stole from clients. 400,000, I can't pay it back. Beverly knows. She offered protection if I fed her what she wanted." I stood there, the man I admired crumbling before me, and all I could feel was hollow. But Amy didn't waste time on grief. She leaned forward, her tone calm, sharp, professional in a way I hadn't heard before. "Marcus, listen to me. Federal prosecutors treat coerced accomplices differently. If you cooperate fully, you can protect yourself. But you need to give them everything, every detail, every contact. No lies." Her words weren't the words of a worried spouse. They were the words of someone who had said this before. Someone who knew the process inside out. I looked at her then, really looked. The meticulous notes, the late-night calls, the way she'd handled Detective Thompson like she'd been doing it her whole life. And the realization hit me like cold water. My wife wasn't just a quiet military spouse with a good head for research. She was something more, something Beverly had no idea she was up against. That night, Marcus agreed. Broken, ashamed, but desperate for redemption, he promised to wear wires, to record, to expose Beverly's operation from the inside. And Amy, she was the one who set it all in motion, the one giving him instructions. The one explaining how federal cooperation worked, as if she weren't reading from a manual but recalling it from memory. Later, when I asked her directly who she'd been talking to on those late-night calls, she paused, then simply said, "People who can help us." It wasn't much of an answer, but it was enough to know this. Amy wasn't just standing by me. She was leading something bigger. And Beverly had no idea that the quiet woman she mocked as just a teacher's wife was about to flip the game on her entirely. Sometimes the most dangerous power isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the calm in someone's voice when everyone else is shouting. That's what Amy carried, and Beverly was about to find out what that really meant. It started with another visit, a knock at the door on a humid Thursday evening just as the sky was fading into that purple haze before night. I opened it, and there she was, Beverly, standing tall with two uniformed officers behind her. Their cruiser's lights spun lazily, washing our house in red and blue. Neighbors peeked from windows, murmuring, waiting for a show. Beverly's smile was razor-thin. "Stephen Robinson," she announced. "You've been formally accused of harassing the HOA board and refusing lawful assessments. Officers, I request his immediate removal." My stomach clenched. This was it, her big move. She wanted me in handcuffs in front of the whole neighborhood. One of the officers, a younger guy with a buzz cut, stepped forward, hand brushing his cuffs. But before he could speak, Amy walked in from the kitchen. Calm, measured, not a trace of fear. She carried a slim folder in her hand like she'd been expecting this exact moment. She approached the officers, her steps steady on the worn hardwood floor. "Before you make any move," she said evenly, "I want you to verify who I am." She handed over her ID, not a driver's license, not a passport, something else, something that made the older officer's eyes widen as he read. He straightened, posture snapping tight, and when he spoke, his voice carried a new weight. "Yes, General." The words froze the air. The younger officer blinked, confused, then quickly adjusted, standing straighter beside his partner. Beverly's face drained of color. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't smiling. She stammered, "WH, what is this? What's going on?" Amy's voice was ice. "This harassment ends now. You've manipulated records, extorted residents, and attempted to weaponize law enforcement for personal gain. Every word you've spoken tonight has been recorded. Every step you've taken has been documented." Her tone wasn't angry, it wasn't loud, it was final. The officers didn't move toward me. They moved toward Beverly. She tried to protest, fumbling for her papers, waving them like a shield. "You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. This is my authority." But the older officer cut her off. "Ma'am, step aside. You're under investigation." The crowd outside was growing now, neighbors edging closer, phones in hand, recording. The same people she'd intimidated for years, finally seeing her exposed. Marcus appeared at the edge of the street, pale and sweating. I knew he'd been wired that night. I knew Amy had arranged it. And when he raised his phone to show the officers the recorded conversations, Beverly demanding compliance, threatening families, bragging about her connections, the last of her armor cracked. Her voice rose, shrill, desperate. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what connections I have?" Amy's reply was calm, almost pitying. "Yes, and now everyone else does too." The officers escorted Beverly away, her shouts echoing down the street. Neighbors stood in stunned silence, then slowly, a ripple of applause broke out. Not loud, not triumphant, more like the release of years of pressure. Relief. I turned to Amy, my heart pounding, questions swirling in my head. "General, federal authority, investigations." She looked at me, eyes steady, and for a moment I almost asked. But then she touched my arm and said softly, "Not now, just breathe." And I realized she was right. The truth would come soon enough. For now, it was enough to know that Beverly's reign of fear had cracked wide open, and the woman I thought I knew was so much more than I'd ever imagined. That night, as the neighborhood buzzed with whispers and Marcus sat trembling at our table, Amy pulled out her binder of evidence one last time. She stacked it neatly, closed the cover, and looked at me. "We're not done yet. This isn't over until the system itself sees what she's been doing." And for the first time in months, I believed we might actually win. The street was quiet after the cruiser pulled away, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet Beverly had ruled with. It wasn't fear anymore. It was stunned disbelief. Neighbors lingered in little clusters on the sidewalk, whispering, phones glowing in their hands as they replayed the moment the officer called Amy, General. Inside our house, the silence felt heavier. Marcus sat at our kitchen table, head in his hands, his tie loosened and damp with sweat. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, like the weight of every bad choice he'd made had finally crashed down all at once. Amy moved with purpose, stacking her papers, setting them aside like a soldier after a mission. She didn't look at Marcus right away. She gave him time to stew in it. Only when the clock on the wall ticked past midnight did she finally sit across from him. Her voice was even calm. "You need to decide, Marcus. Are you going to keep covering for her, or are you going to save yourself?" He looked up, eyes bloodshot. "Save myself? You don't understand. They'll destroy me. The debts, the bar association, I'll lose everything." Amy didn't flinch. "You already lost everything the moment you chose her over your family. The only thing left is whether you face justice as a victim of coercion or as a willing accomplice." The words hung there, sharp as broken glass. I wanted to defend him. He was my brother after all, but deep down I knew she was right. The next morning, Marcus made his choice. He walked into the Federal building downtown with Amy at his side. I waited in the car, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached, while they disappeared through the glass doors. Hours later, when they came out, he looked like a man who had just signed his soul away. Because in a sense, he had. He had agreed to full cooperation, handing over every record, every message, every meeting he'd had with Beverly and her backers. What shocked me wasn't just what he'd confessed. It was what Amy had already known. On the drive home, she finally started to open up. Her words came slowly, like she was measuring every one of them. Beverly wasn't just running a neighborhood scam. She was funneling money into shell corporations tied to Morris Development. False infrastructure bids, fake assessments. The HOA was just the cover. I gripped the wheel tighter. "And you've known this whole time." She didn't answer right away. She just looked out the window, watching the city roll past. Finally, she said softly, "I knew enough to recognize the signs, and I knew enough people to make sure someone was watching." Her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before, not just calm, not just firm, but official. That night when I pressed her, she gave me the smallest glimpse of the truth. "Stephen, my career didn't end when I left the base. I still work with federal investigations. Financial crimes, organized fraud. What Beverly stumbled into wasn't just petty greed. It crossed lines she didn't even understand." I sat there stunned, all the late-night calls, the meticulous notes. The way Detective Thompson had snapped to attention the moment he saw her ID. It all made sense now. Amy wasn't just my wife. She was the reason Beverly had finally been stopped. But Beverly wasn't done. 2 nights later, while the neighborhood was finally starting to relax, a black SUV rolled slowly past our house. Not the cops, not Beverly, someone else. The windows were tinted, the plates unfamiliar. It didn't stop, just cruised by, then disappeared around the corner. Amy saw it too. She didn't panic. She didn't even speak at first. She just closed the curtains, locked the door, and said, "The network's bigger than her, and now they know we're in the middle of it." Marcus heard her words and buried his face in his hands again. He knew exactly what that meant. The neighbors thought the nightmare was over when Beverly was hauled off. They didn't realize we'd only cut off one head of the snake. And standing there in our dimly lit kitchen, I realized something chilling. The real battle hadn't even started yet. The morning after the black SUV rolled past, the air in the neighborhood felt different. Heavy, like a storm was about to break, even though the sky was clear. I walked the street, nodding at neighbors who were finally cutting grass again, letting their kids ride bikes without fear. On the surface, things looked normal, but behind every smile there was a question they were too afraid to say out loud. Was it really over? That night, Amy finally told me the whole truth. We sat at the table where this fight had begun, the same scratched oak that had held Beverly's false documents, Dorothy's notebooks, Marcus's trembling confessions. Amy set her binder down one last time, her hands steady. Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried that hard edge I'd only seen in soldiers and cops who'd seen too much. Stephen, I didn't just serve, I stayed. I worked with federal task forces on financial crimes. I still do. Beverly wasn't just greedy, she was connected. Morris Development has ties that stretch into other states. They use HOAs because nobody questions them until it's too late. I just sat there trying to take it in. My wife, the quiet force who balanced our family, who I thought lived her life in the shadow of my teaching job. She had been fighting battles I couldn't even see. She reached across the table, her hand warm against mine. You kept the neighbors together. You gave them hope. That mattered as much as anything I did. It was the first time in months I let myself breathe. But the fight wasn't over. The very next week, federal agents rolled into our neighborhood. Not loud, not with sirens. Quiet sedans, agents in plain clothes. They moved with purpose, knocking on doors, asking questions, collecting records. Dorothy cried when they thanked her for her notebook. The young families who'd been too afraid to speak finally opened up, relief spilling out like a dam breaking. For the first time, it felt like the system was listening. And Beverly, she tried to fight. From the holding cell, she filed motions, demanded release, threatened to expose her connections. But Marcus's recordings, Amy's documentation, Dorothy's logs, and the mountain of neighbor testimony buried her. Piece by piece, the empire she'd built on fear collapsed. The day the indictment was unsealed, I read it twice. Fraud, extortion, racketeering, words that felt surreal sitting on official paper. Beverly wasn't just an overbearing HOA president. She was the front face of a criminal scheme that had stretched far beyond our cul-de-sac. And Marcus, my brother, testified. Broken, ashamed, but honest. He gave them everything. I don't know if it will save his career, but maybe it'll save his soul. The night the agents left, the neighborhood gathered in our driveway. No speeches, no formalities, just tired people standing together for the first time without fear. Someone brought lemonade. Someone else baked cookies. Kids played in the grass while their parents traded nervous laughter. It felt almost ordinary again. As the sun dipped low and the street filled with the soft glow of porch lights, Dorothy raised her glass of lemonade and said softly, "Sometimes the strongest walls are built by neighbors, not boards." Everyone clapped, a quiet, grateful sound. Later, when the crowd dispersed and the house was quiet, I asked Amy the question that had been burning in me since the moment the officer called her General. "Why didn't you tell me?" She paused, looking down at her hands, then back at me. "Because sometimes, Stephen, knowing too much too soon puts you in more danger. I needed you to be what you already are, the man who stands up when others are afraid. If you'd carried my truth from the start, you wouldn't have been able to play that role." Her words hit me harder than any revelation. Because she was right. In the end, it wasn't just her badge or my brother's testimony or Dorothy's notes that saved us. It was the simple, stubborn act of ordinary people refusing to bow. And I learned something I'll never forget. Strength doesn't always look like force. Sometimes it looks like a teacher standing up in a community hall. Sometimes it looks like an old woman's shaky handwriting. Sometimes it looks like a wife who carries secrets not to deceive you, but to protect you. Beverly thought money could buy silence. She thought fear could keep us divided. She thought power was permanent. But the truth, power built on fear always cracks. And when it does, all it takes is one person willing to say enough for everything to change. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.